The morning the HOA fined me for trespassing on a shoreline my father taught me to read was the morning I decided to buy the ground under their fancy docks and tell the water, the paper, and the people where they really stood. My name's Noah Rourke, but around our lake folks just say Rourke like it's printed on the back of an old feed cap. I'm 46, carpenter by trade and boatwright by stubbornness. With a scar across my left thumb from the year, I learned cedar planks don't care about your bravado. I grew up on this little Midwestern kettle lake, glacial blue with a line of cattails like eyelashes around it, back when it was frogs, rowboats, and one cranky muskrat that hated our dog. My dad was a county survey tech who could look across water and tell you where a deed line ran, not the fence, not the rumor, the line. He taught me to throw a spud bar like a javelin to break spring ice, and to read plats the way other kids read comic books. My mother ran the bait shop out of our garage every summer, selling minnows in coffee cans, and advice that somehow made the bluegill bite. I married Jess on the dock he built, the one with a knot that looked like a heart. Cancer took her 7 years ago during a winter that wouldn't quit, and on nights when grief was loud, Ellie, our girl, would ask to go to Mom's water. We'd sit by the cattails with thermoses and listen to late ice groan like an old church organ, and the world would find its pitch again. Work is a blessing when your heart is noisy, so I kept my shop busy, repairing old Chris crafts, building quiet little cedar skiffs, fixing other people's docks before the first warm weekend. I never wanted to own anything except my tools, our little house, and a few clean corners of water that keep a person honest. The lake changed in the way lakes do when developers find them. What used to be cow pasture and 2 summer cabins turned into North Shore estates. Curving streets with names stolen from trees that weren't invited. Stone mail kiosks that looked like they guarded bullion. And a board in polo shirts that learned the word amenity and wouldn't let it go. I didn't begrudge anyone a back deck and a view. You want to sit with your coffee and watch loons? I'll build you a chair that doesn't wobble. But there's seeing water and there's owning it. And most folks don't know the difference until paper says it out loud. The first letter came on thick stock, North Shore State's Homeowners Association, in a serif that tried too hard. Notice of violation, it said, unauthorized entry upon community shoreline facilities. They attached a photo of me at dawn, pants rolled, pushing our old cedar canoe off a patch of sand I'd raked smooth. The same patch Dad used to keep tidy with a 2-tine rake and a can of beer set in the shade. Somebody had circled me in red, like a deer on opening day. Fine, $400. Additional trespass will be referred to law enforcement. I walked into their model home office that smelled like cinnamon and commission. The board president, a man named Chad who ironed his polo while wearing it, gave me a smile that said he learned empathy from a podcast. Mr. Rourke, our shoreline is for residents and dues-paying members only. Your shoreline, I said, letting the words sit like a wet anchor. Show me your deed to the sand. It's in our covenants, he said. Covenants are a handshake, I said. Deeds are the hand. He glanced at the HOA manager, a woman with a tablet and the patience of a DMV. You may appeal at the next meeting, he said. 3 minutes at the mic. I nodded like a man accepts an invitation to a haunted house. Then I drove to my shop and found Ellie at the workbench, smoothing the gun of a canoe with sandpaper and the kind of attention grief teaches young. They fined you, she asked, reading my face fast as a barometer. For trespassing, I said, on the place your granddad raked. Her mouth did that hard line. That looks like mine. They can't own the water, she said. They can't own what they didn't buy, I said. But they can make a mess trying. At their meeting, I stood in a room full of people who wanted to be left, alone in proximity to one another. My name is Rourke. I said into a mic that smelled like coffee breath. My family's been tending that patch of sand since before your gate learned to squeak. If your paper says it belongs to you, your paper's wrong. Chad said, our surveyor surveys draw. I said, deeds assign. A man in the back, visor and mirrored shades perched on his hat indoors, muttered, lake rat. Not quiet. I looked at him, then at Ellie sitting in the second row with her jaw set. Petty has a sound, and I heard it. You don't pick fights when you're raising a kid who knows what it's like to wake up in a house where a woman's voice used to live. You pick moments where standing up tells that kid something about how to live. For us, that shoreline was not just a strip of tan between green and blue. It was where Jess and I dipped Ellie's little feet the first day the ice went out. It was where we scattered a handful of ash on a wind that carried like glitter. It was a place I taught Ellie to let go and swim toward me while I walked backward slow, palms out. The HOA calling it an amenity felt like a stranger telling you your mother is a feature. When Ellie pretended it didn't bug her, I watched the way she scrubbed her hands twice as long at the sink and knew it did. And my shop, built into what used to be Dad's pole barn, relied on clients who had docks and boats and questions I could answer. A trespass fine might have been an annoyance. A trespasser reputation could be a choke point on my livelihood if they got noisy. Loss makes you pragmatic in weird ways. You learn to pick up the right tool for the job. Sometimes the tool is a ratchet. Sometimes it's a deed. They started the way the small power crowd always starts, with paper and shame. A security contractor in a black polo, badge on a lanyard, muscles that once mattered, told me I couldn't access community facilities when I steered our canoe toward the gap in their dock. This gap has been here since before your lanyard. I said, easy. He took a photo anyway and said, smile. I didn't. 2 days later, a tow truck backed down my drive looking for an abandoned vessel. It was my John boat with an outboard older than Chad's skincare routine. I asked the driver if he had a court order. He didn't. He left, sorry and lighter than when he came in, which is a win. The HOA sent a certified letter claiming my small wooden maintenance pier encroached on HOA-owned riparian corridor. They attached a diagram with a dotted line that made the lake look like a pie they could slice. Someone, bless their heart, spray painted an old guess on the public fishing access sign down by County Road B. That sign had been there since the state stock perch in '78. I scrubbed it with a wire brush and repainted the letters with Ellie and the kind of straight, careful strokes you use when something is both dumb and sacred. I don't throw punches. I flip folders. The morning after the tow truck, I drove to the county recorder's office, an old brick building that smells like lemon oil because Janice at the front desk refuses to let dust win. Morning, Rourke, she said, sliding a candy jar my way. What are we planning today? Truth, I said. North Shore plats, every phase. Also any outlot or shore reserve recorded around Lake Maris. She pushed a cart to a table under fluorescent lights that make liars blink. The original plat from the 60s was a beauty, hand-drawn. The lake traced like a thumbprint with narrow ring labeled Outlot A, Shoreline Reserve, retained by Maris Properties, Incorporated. The cabins then had easements across that outlot to the water, not ownership. In the 90s, a developer turned Maris Properties into a different corporate shell and sold off upland lots in clusters, always with language like enjoyment of the lake via Outlot A per recorded license. When North Shore came along, their plat showed common shoreline amenity, but the deed below referenced only their blocks and lots. Outlot A wasn't there. The transfer of Outlot A? Never recorded. Janice frowned with me. Developer kept control of the shore for dock rentals, she said. I remember the invoices. When they went bust in '09, nobody wanted that ring. Too much liability, not enough tax glamour. Who owns Outlot now? I asked. She rolled to the tax records terminal. Maris Properties Incorporated dissolved 2010. Last tax payment. 2011. Certified delinquent. Went to the annual tax sale twice. No bidder found. Which means, she clicked one more time and smiled, the county holds a lien, eligible for assignment. What's the redemption period? I asked. 1 year from notice. She said, if we do it today, that clock starts. If the old interest holders or whoever they were don't pay the back taxes plus interest, you get a tax deed. We both looked at the screen like it was a fish that just rolled near the boat. I called an old friend, Gus Penner, retired DNR lake inspector with forearms like baseball bats and a voice that made rules sound like common sense. Gus, I said, if a man bought a narrow ring of dirt around a private non-meandered lake, what does he own? The soil under the docks, he said without asking why, and the right to set reasonable rules for wharfing out. Also, if it's non-navigable in fact, and title runs to the center of the lake from each shore owner, that ring is powerful. If it's navigable in law, the state owns the bed but not the bank. Either way, that outlot is where the paperwork touches water. Why? Because the HOA just sold me a fine for standing on my own sand, I said, and I'm about to buy their shadow. I didn't move without a lawyer. I called Evelyn Cho, a retired water rights attorney who had moved to town to be near grandkids and a good bakery. She reads deeds like other folks read recipes and bakes arguments low and slow. She met me at the recorder's office with readers on a chain. Outlawed and never transferred, she murmured, finger on the page. They only licensed access across it. When the corporation died, the taxes died with it. The ring's been asleep. Let's wake it up. I bought the tax certificate with a cashier's check that took my knees a little to write. Janice stamped things with satisfying thunk that sounded like boundaries reappearing. We sent notice to any last known addresses of Maris properties dead, to the registered agent, a P.O. box with cobwebs, and in North Shore states, whose manager wrote back a snotty letter implying, "We will cure this without attaching any money." The redemption clock started ticking. When you push against petty power in a small town, the right people show up like saints without candles. Deputy Torres, who grew up fishing my mom's minnows and now wears a badge like a neighbor wears a tool belt, stopped by my shop and said, "Between you and me, the sheriff's office is tired of getting HOA calls about criminal geese." Stay clean. Gus came with a topo map, 2 coffees, and a laugh. "If you get that ring," he said, "we're going to put an end to these spaghetti docks that look like a spider fell into a box of toothpicks." A retired title examiner named Ruth, blunt bob haircut, pencil behind her ear, sat at my kitchen table, spread the chain of title like a quilt, and pointed at places where developer laziness had become HOA arrogance. Across the lake, an older gentleman named Harvey, Vietnam vet, retired union electrician, walked over with 2 dusty sign brackets in his hands. "Found these when I was reorganizing," he said, "from when the old resort posted no wake signs where the water got skinny. If you need help posting anything, my wrists still work." And Janice at the recorder started leaving little sticky notes on copies. "Don't forget to file notice of interest, so they can't do anything cute. And call the treasurer, they like checks." Ellie, who had watched me sit on grief and behave, watched me move and smile for the first time in a way that didn't look borrowed. "We're buying the dirt under their docks?" she asked one night, stirring chili. "Or the threat of it," I said. "Either way, we'll own the part they forgot to respect." North Shore tried what bullies try when they feel paper slip. Theater. They sent a lawyer named Brooke, slick suit, city shoes scared of. Puddles, who filed an emergency motion to invalidate the tax sale as against public policy, which is rich, because public policy is exactly why counties sell tax liens when people forget to pay. Evelyn's response was a quiet sonnet about statutes and notice and the magic words, "Tax deed vests title in fee simple absolute." That make judges hum. We walked into a courthouse that has seen more wheat than drama. The judge was the same one who granted me the right to be human when Jess died, and I forgot to file something on time. He read both sides, then asked Brooke, "Did your client pay the taxes?" "No, Your Honor," she said. "Then we're done here," he said. "If they want the shoreline, they can redeem like anyone else." North Shore's board sent a letter to residents saying, "Our legal team is on it," which I think is HOA for "we hope he's bluffing." They were less jaunty when their management company, Blue Harbor, got a letter from the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division about collecting dock license fees without a recorded right to land under those docks. Doug, the retired auditor Beth had hired for a different mess last year, found that Blue Harbor had been routing those dock fees to a separate LLC named Shore Life Partners, registered to the board president's brother-in-law. The minute a regulator learns a new acronym, governance grows teeth. 6 months rolled by and no one redeemed. On a cold morning that smelled like rain and old coffee, Janice called. "Come down," she said. "Bring a pen." I signed to the tax deed to Outlot A, that skinny ring of power, and recorded it. The clerk stamped document number 2025-004382 and handed it back like she was giving me an heirloom. Evelyn walked across to the courthouse and filed a quiet title action to shut out any ghost claims. We sent certified notices to every dock owner, informing them that, effective immediately, docks rested on Rourke-owned shoreline subject to reasonable regulation. We are not here to be cruel, the letter said. We are here to be correct. Docks will be permitted for safety and spacing. Illegal boardwalks must be removed. Non-compliant structures will be tagged and scheduled for removal. License fees will be deposited in a dedicated lake stewardship fund, audited annually and open to all. Chad called me, voice sharp. You can't do this. I did, I said. Or, more accurately, your developer forgot to. And I finished their sentence. You're extorting families, he said. I'm offering licenses, not bulldozers. I said, if you want to fight in court, we can, but you'll need your insurer. And when they see that Blue Harbor was taking dock money into a related LLC, their first question won't be about me. There was a long silence, the kind a man makes when the bluff leaves his body. We tagged the non-compliant docks with bright orange ribbons the way foresters mark the trees that need attention. Gus and I walked the ring at dawn in waders, tape in hand, spacing docks with the grace of a man who's plowed a straight row. You can have your dock, we'd tell folks, just not your neighbor's water, too. Most people were decent. A few were loud, which is what people are when fear meets audience. Evelyn filed a stipulation in court with a tax deed attached, the chain of title, the clarification that outlawed and never moved from its original corporate owner until it moved to me. The judge signed my quiet title. The recorder indexed it, and the insurer for the HOA called me like a man apologizing for calling late. We'd like to discuss global resolution, he said, using the only language insurance companies know. Evelyn sat him down, poured coffee, and laid out terms. I'd grant non-exclusive dock licenses to every lot with historical use for a nominal fee that covered inspection, upkeep, and annual sonar scan for invasive weeds. The illegal boardwalk North Shore had built across Outlot A without permit would be removed at their cost. The HOA would pay for riprap on eroded sections. Blue Harbor would be gone by Friday. And a new shoreline committee with actual grown-ups on it. Beth Harvey and a science teacher who can tell a snapping turtle from a plastic bag would coordinate the lake calendar with me, not against me. Chad resigned with a, for personal reasons, note that read like a lawyer sat on his hands while he typed. Blue Harbor sent a letter through a lawyer with the kind of embossed letterhead that tries to cover stains, offering to transition. We declined the generosity and accepted their box of mislabeled files. The AG's office wrung a consent order out of Shore Life Partners for restitution to the HOA for dock fees collected without right. Residents got little checks with commas that felt like the world admitting it miscounted and then fixing the scoreboard. I hired 2 high school kids and Harvey to help remove the boardwalk planks on a Saturday. We salvaged the good lumber and built benches at the public fishing access. On each bench, Ellie burned a small brass tag, "Return to the lake." Evelyn had one more surprise. She found a sentence in the old resort bylaws, recorded back when men smoked in meetings and told women what color the curtain should be, that granted public fishing in perpetuity along the southern arc of Outlot A. Nobody had read it in decades. Nobody had needed to. I called the county. You want a proper fishing path? I asked, we'll grant a 5-foot public easement, no bikes, dawn to dusk, fishing only, maintained by the county, posted clean and right. You fund it. We stand by it. They said yes in the careful way money says yes when it knows it ought to. We cut a narrow path and graveled it like it mattered. We posted signs politely asking for leave no trace, and meant it. A boy in a camo hoodie caught his first base there, and did the dance all boys do when a living thing tells them they're part of a bigger story. That path did more for neighborliness than 10,000 HOA emails about community. On the day we finished the last riprap, and the path dried out after a week of reasonable rain, Ellie and I took the cedar canoe out at sunrise. The lake was a sheet of hammered silver, and the heron that hates me lifted off with that prehistoric patience you can't teach. We paddled past tidy docks spaced like good teeth in a mouth, past the place where the boardwalk had bullied the cattails, and now the cattails bully back in green, past the little brass tags on benches with names like anyone and everyone. Beth waved from the new, sensible board with a trash bag in one hand and a donut in the other. Harvey tipped his hat. Gus stood in his waders, hands on hips, surveying a shoreline that finally looked like it had a center of gravity. We drifted over the patch of sand Dad raked and just laughed on, and Ellie touched the gun with those fingers that have her mother's honest shape. "You bought the shoreline," she said, not as a boast, as an equation. "I bought the part they forgot to respect," I said. Then I charged them just enough to remember. "What will you do with the money?" she asked. "We already did it," I said, and told her about the Lake Stewardship Fund, the little scholarships we set up in Jess's name for kids who want to study water and welding and the practical arts of keeping a place alive. I told her about how the first check went to a girl from North Shore who took care of her little brother while her mom worked double and still found time to pull monofilament out of cattails on Saturdays. Ellie smiled in that way that looks like sunrise feels. A week later, I stood in court one last time as the judge read the consent orders into the record. He looked at me over his glasses the way a man looks at a fence he just leaned on and liked. "Mr. Rourke," he said, "anything further?" "Just this," I said. "The day they fined me for trespassing on a shoreline my father showed me was the day I remember what Dad taught. Paper's only honest if you make it be. We didn't drown anyone in revenge. We just pulled the docks off the piece of ground that never belonged to them and set the lines right." He nodded, stamped, and we all went back to lives that hummed instead of screamed. "If you want a moral, take mine. Don't confuse manners for weakness, and don't mistake a brochure for a deed. Lakes don't care about fonts. Water doesn't respect bravado. It respects gravity. Buy the ground under the noise if you have to. Hold it steady, and give the decent majority a way to be decent. Justice wasn't the orange tags, or the board resignations, or the checks with commas. It was a quiet after, when the blue lay where it belonged. Kids fished where they were welcome, and the men who love lanyards learned the love rules that applied to them too. I keep the tax deed in a drawer next to Dad's old plumb bob and Jess's favorite pocket knife. On hard days, I put a hand on all three. On good days, I don't need to. Either way, I sleep like a fence bow sunk deep, set true, straight, and right where I'm supposed to be. Because when petty power tried to throw me off my own shoreline, I bought the line and evicted their docks. And the lake, which remembers everything, exhaled. Spring brought quiet that sounded like a hell breath. And then, right on cue, the kind of noise that comes on letterhead. The new management outfit North Shore hired after Blue Harbor fled, Cedar and Stone, a name that sounds sturdy until you see their templates. Mail me a shoreline maintenance assessment notice with a paragraph about delinquency and a threat to lien HOA common property, including all shoreline. The letter called the lake an ocean twice and referenced a statute from a state with palm trees, which told me their paralegal had done a copy-paste from a coastal condo somewhere and never looked out a window. I poured coffee, called Evelyn, and put the letter under the leg of a wobbly chair until she arrived. She read it, pinched the bridge of her nose, and said, "They tried to record a blanket lien against your outlot this morning." We drove to Janice. The attempted lien had bounced back because the legal description was common shoreline amenity. Janice tapped the screen and said, "Not a legal description, a mood." Evelyn wrote a 2-page demand letter that read like a lullaby with teeth and attached a draft slander of title complaint with a fee motion bolded for the folks in the back. Cedar and Stone's lawyer called me with a voice so careful you could skate on it and said they'd withdraw the clerical error. We filed anyway and took a consent judgment for fees. The check bought a load of riprap where the bank liked to slump and paid for 3 aluminum ladders I mounted to the public side of the path. The kind a kid can grab from cold water without asking a miracle. Beth put out a bulletin in teacher plane that said, "We will not be clouding titles we don't own." The board voted to sack Cedar and Stone and hire a local woman named Robin who still uses a paper planner and knows what a ditch does when it rains. We built a habit of doing things in daylight. On Tuesday nights, I opened my shop for boat school. Harvey cussed at not tying like a poet and taught kids how to snug a cleat hitch that wouldn't embarrass them. Gus gave a talk about milfoil like it was a villain in a small town play. Ellie led a quick lesson on sanding that ended with a stack of cedar rails as smooth as a good apology. People came who had frowned at me in meetings and left smelling like sawdust, which is halfway to forgiveness. All that good work drew a man who hates it when things aren't about him. His name was Victor Malloy, and he bought the last big lot on the point with money that looked bored. He wore loafers on gravel and called the lake the Asset. He submitted plans for a 2-story dock with a rooftop bar, a slide, and a neon sign that would have made a base forget its own name. He tried to anchor an offshore party pen inside my outlot line, claiming riparian rights that existed only in his head. He sent me an email through a lawyer named Sierra that said, "Your refusal to accommodate my brand of enjoyment constitutes tortious interference," which made me want to embroider words on a pillow and mail it back. I called Gus and Kelsey from DNR. They came with clipboards and the kind of smiles that say they've been waiting to cite something honestly all week. We measured, flagged, and told Victor to pull it all back or face fines that would buy the county a new truck. He huffed, filmed himself calling me a lake tyrant, posted it, and learned what happens when a video meets a town that knows the difference between a plat and a promise. His permits were denied. He sued. He withdrew. He cut the dock down to something an adult could look at without rolling their eyes and, to his credit, sent me a note 4 months later that said, "I came in wrong." I wrote back, "Start over." He did a little. Summer hit like a grin and brought a tradition I didn't know existed. Light the lake, which, translated from HOA to English, meant fireworks off docks after midnight from people who never read a wind map. We were in the middle of a drought that made grass snap and made me say grace for every boat that didn't leak. The county had a burn ban on, and the volunteer firefighters were hot, tired, and honest about their limits. Beth put out a bulletin that said, "No fireworks on the Greenbelt or Shoreline." Robin posted signs. I sent a letter as the owner of Outlot A saying, "No ignition sources from the Outlot, no exceptions." A handful of guys decided their fun was bigger than everybody else's lungs. Victor, to his residual shame, was one, a dentist with midlife crisis, and a pontoon named Tax Write-Off was another. They stacked mortar tubes on planks that sat on my dirt and called me controlling when I said no. Evelyn walked a restraining order into the courthouse. The judge signed it from his front porch, wearing a Chiefs t-shirt, because he also reads the weather and knew what a spark would do to our cattails. Deputy Torres delivered it himself with the kind of bedside manner that keeps towns from breaking. "You light," he told Victor. "You leave in a cruiser." At 10 p.m., lightning walked the horizon like a man who needed to say something. Half the lake put their fireworks away. 3 docks down, a bottle rocket tipped and shot sideways into the path, kissed a patch of dry grass, and started writing fast in a script everybody can read. Harvey and I were 10 yards from it with a water can and a flat shovel. We stomped, swatted, and poured. The flame laid down like a dog that remembered its name. A kid cried, the kind of sound that makes your spine grow hands. The man with the pontoon apologized, out loud, with his face. We hauled his tubes into the bed of my truck, and I told him he could have them back in December if he learned the burn ban rules by heart. He did. 2 weeks later, a storm came for real. A whitecap wind pushed a kayak out from under a kid who had no business being where he was, and he went under in that quiet way shallow water does when it means business. Ellie saw the cap roll and said his name like a command. I was on the path in 6 steps flat with my boots, splashing through honesty. The ladder we'd mounted was right there where habit had demanded it. I reached, grabbed a soaked shoulder's worth of boy, and we both coughed our way into air that never tasted better. His mother sat right down in the gravel and prayed to a god she had argued with 5 minutes earlier. Later that week, Beth put a map on the newsletter showing 13 ladders mounted around the lake, and the line, paid for by the same fees that made you roll your eyes and march. People stopped rolling their eyes. DNR came out in August with a new ordinary high watermark, and half the dock sat too low like a pair of pants somebody outgrew. Instead of panic, we held a Saturday raise day. We brought wrenches, jacks, and humor. Even Victor showed, sweaty and useful. Kelsey found the first milfoil patch of the season. The stewardship fund paid for a diver with a mesh bag and hands that treat invasives like a sin. When the sun dropped one night in late September, Ellie handed me a paper lantern and said, "For Mom." We lit a dozen on the public path. No flame, just a little LEDs that looked like hope without heat. The lanterns floated soft over water that had learned our names, not just our complaints. We didn't post a photo. We stood there, quiet, and let the blue breathe. A week later in court, we closed a slander of title case with a bow that looked like a consent decree. The judge ordered Cedar and Stone to send a letter to every North Shore homeowner explaining that the shoreline was owned by me, regulated by law, and licensed in a way that made safety and decency possible. He said, "In my county, we do not scare people with paper." I put the order in the drawer with Dad's plumb bob and Jess's pocket knife. If you're looking for revenge, I got mine years ago when the lake exhaled the first time. Everything since has been maintenance, of banks, of habits, of neighbors' better selves. But if you want a line to carry in your pocket, take this. By the ground under noise, hold it without swagger, and when the world wants to light a fuse on your shoreline, show up with a ladder and a water can. It turns out justice looks a lot like keeping kids' heads above water and giving grown men a way to put their fireworks back in a box without losing their dignity. Winter came in sideways, the way it does when the wind decides fences are suggestions. The week after the judge ordered Cedar and Stone to stop scaring people with paper, they tried one more trick, dumping plow snow on my outlot, because that's where the pile has always gone. I watched the loader nudge a mountain of salty slush toward the cattails like a man pushing a bad idea into a better place. I walked down, raised a mitten, and said, "Salt kills. Not today." The driver shrugged, decent guy, eyes tired. He was just doing what the clipboard told him. I called Robin, then Kelly. 10 minutes later, Kelly rolled up, boots already laced. She pointed at the bank and explained, teacher plane, how chloride turns a lake into a sick thing. The HOA rerouted the pile to the end of the cul-de-sac, grumbling, and I handed the driver a thermos cup, because you can't fix policy and skip kindness. That night, I sketched a plan for 2 snowmelt swales that would catch the worst and filter the rest through a layer of washed stone and prairie roots. The stewardship fund bought the fabric, the stone, and the seed. Owen cut the lines with my old compact loader like he was signing his name in the dirt. A man with an opinion about everything slipped on a patch of ice and caught himself on the new rail we'd installed last month. He stood there, heartbeat loud in his throat, and patted the rail like it had saved his life. Maybe it had. The power went out during the biggest blow, the kind that makes trees talk in the dark. You learn who's who when the grid quits. Robin texted the neighborhood app with 2 words, warming, shop, and a map pin. I fired up the generator at my place and left the bay door open a foot like a mouth breathing. Harvey dragged in 2 propane heaters. Beth brought a crock pot of chili that made the whole town smell like my mother's kitchen. Victor showed up, cheeks red, eyes different, carrying a small generator under one arm like a repentant offering. "For the house on the point," he said. "She's 86. I nodded, and we hauled across the path together, cords tripping our ankles. The woman at the point, Mrs. Kemp, widow of a man who could mend a reel blindfolded, opened the door and said, "I didn't vote for you in my head, Mr. Rourke, but I'm grateful with my mouth." We smiled at each other like grown-ups who understand where we were and where we got to. The lake needs air in winter as much as people do, but the aerator had been running off a line I didn't trust. We rigged a battery backup with a transfer switch that clicked like a small promise when the power dipped. While we were checking it, Ellie saw flashlight beams jittering out past the point. 2 teenagers had taken a snowmobile where the ice likes to lie. A pressure crack huffed, and I felt that old friend cold fear set its teeth in my neck. I grabbed the toss bag and the ladder line and walked slow, the way you do when you're carrying the distance between caution and catastrophe. We yelled our names and made our voices boring on purpose. The boys were more scared than hurt. Snowmobile half swallowed, but the ice holding. We walked them back across the footbridges we'd laid last week, and nobody fell, and nobody got famous. Later, one of the boys' fathers, who had once told me I was ruining the vibe, left a note in my mailbox with 2 words, "Thank you." It took him 3 tries to spell both right. That's not me being mean. That's me being grateful he tried. A few days after the lights came back and people remembered dishes go in dishwashers, an envelope showed up with a lawyer's return address in the city that confuses noise with importance. The mayor's name was on the letterhead in small print. a granddaughter, Leah, had found a shoebox of resort papers in her aunt's attic and wanted to know what happened to our shoreline. Evelyn called her instead of writing back. Leah drove up with a pie and a wary face. We sat at my kitchen table with the shoebox between us. She pulled out postcard, hand-drawn maps, and a ledger with the names of men who paid a nickel for a boat rental in 1964. There was a photo of my mother in her 20s, hair wrapped in a scarf, handing a kid a cane pole with a smile like a life raft. Leah said, "I don't want to fight. I wanted to see what my family lost." I said, "Your family ran the place. Mine raked the sand. We can both tell the truth." We walked the path to Aaron's Bend. She put her hand on the plate and read the words out loud. She cried, not because of me, but because of what the lake does to people when it tells them what they already knew. We sailed the next week with paper that was more ceremony than dispute. A quick claim for $10 and a promise that the little display at the bait shop would carry the mayor's story in a frame with their photo. Leah brought me an old no-wake sign with please for kids painted on it in a hand from before fonts got loud. We hung it on the public side like a prayer. Tax season brought one more paper storm. The HOA's bank tried to file a blanket UCC financing statement against all common assets, including shoreline interests. Evelyn sent back a page that started with no and ended with a fee petition that made the banker cough on the phone. They withdrew at noon and sent a letter at one apologizing for overbreadth. I cashed a check and bought solar bollard lights for the public path. Gentle ones that don't confuse birds and make a boy's bike safer when he's riding home from a fish that got away. Deputy Torres stopped me on the path one evening and said, "You know, we got less calls this winter than the last 5. I could get used to that." I told him quiet is a team sport. When spring has had enough of winter's mouth, it just shows up, and our lake opened its eyes one morning without asking anyone permission. We held our second raised day, and the muscle memory was there in everybody's hands. Kelsey certified the new high water line, and we painted small, honest marks on a few dock posts so folks could check their pride against something besides their neighbor. The stewardship fund paid for a spring trash haul. We pulled 3 tires, a black lawn chair, and a boat fender that drifted up from somebody's idea of a good Saturday. Ellie ran boat school again. A kid from North Shore who used to avoid the shop because I made his dad nervous now bugs me with design questions and brings me drawings of canoes with wings. We hosted the first Jess Rourke Small Boats Day on a Saturday with wind that would make a kite jealous. 22 kids in plywood prams and cedar canoes. I could built blindfolded ran a sloppy figure 8 between buoys while parents who used to write me emails cheered like they were at a state final. Victor showed up with a tray of lemonade and stood behind the grill all afternoon without talking about himself. At the end, he handed me $50 for the scholarship jar and said, "I'm still me. I'm trying to be a better me." I said, "Keep trying. We notice." Beth talked me into letting the newsletter run a photo of Ellie and me at dusk. Backs to the camera, lantern glow on the water, like a secret that likes being told softly. The caption just said, "Home." The next page had a list of fees and dates and rules written in language a smart 10-year-old could understand. We left out words like amenity. We kept words like please and thank you. We added one sentence at the bottom Robin insisted on. If you're not sure, ask. People did. Men who never asked anything in their lives started asking which way. The wind would go if it shifted. Women who run households with the grace of air traffic controllers asked what native grass would keep their bank honest. I answered her. I said, "I don't know. Let's find out." And we did. By late June, the lake felt like a song somebody finally learned to sing on key. The milfoil diver waved at Ellie from under the surface and came up with a mesh bag that looked less miserable than last year. Gus remeasured the spacings and declared them not embarrassing. The AG's office closed their file with a note that said, "Compliance observed," which in regulator is the equivalent of a hug. The county put a small plaque at the start of the path. Outlot A, kept by the people who live on both sides, and I screwed it down with stainless lag and felt my father's plumb bob heavy in my pocket like a blessing. Folks still mutter. A man who thinks rules or suggestions will always exist. But now when somebody gets lippy on the app, 5 other somebodies reply with the map, the deed, and a reminder, be decent. You want the next act of revenge? There isn't one. The point wasn't to keep swinging. It was to make it so nobody had to. The thing I keep from this winter and spring is small. The sound of a generator humming in the corner of my shop, while people kept warm without making a big deal. The feel of a ladder rung under a kid's hands. The look on Leah's face when her family story found a wall it deserved. The way Victor said less and did more. The way Ellie learned that vengeance is a spice and stewardship is a meal. If there's a line worth carrying forward, it's this. I bought the ground under their noise, held it without swagger, and made a path where anybody willing to behave could pass. The lake remembers all of it. The fines, the fights, the fixes, the quiet. And at sundown, when the surface goes flat enough to show you your own face, it will tell you the truth if you let it. We paid what was owed. We keep it paid. We sleep like fence posts sunk deep, straight and true, because the map finally matches the ground, and the ground finally has enough good hands on it to hold.